I don't usually watch many recent movies nowadays, and while 7 isn't much, it's more than I've seen within prior years. That's kind of ironic, considering 2020 was a very dry year for movies due to corona-induced delays. The reason I saw so many was mostly accidental, as I intended to watch maybe 4 of them at most, and that's with an emphasis on maybe. I also saw some movies within the year that weren't from 2020, most notably Seven, Inception, The Dark Knight, and Into the Spider-Verse. All of these movies are really good, especially that last one, but I'm not including them in my ranking. That brings about the question of whether the 2020 movies I saw were any good, and that's what I'll go into now. Number 7. Death to 2020. What an appropriate movie to end the year on. I saw this during the holidays with my family, and I probably wouldn't have seen it otherwise. It started out really funny, with some great jokes, but honestly, the jokes became grating really fast. Even though this movie is only 70 minutes long, I still couldn't wait for it to be over, and if a movie or any piece of media makes me feel that, then that's not a good sign. It's a very political movie, and it kind of has to be given the year, but very in-your-face political ramblings do make me cringe a bit. If this movie had retained the fun factor from its first 20 minutes, then it would have been higher on this list, but since I got so bored with it, I had to place it at the bottom. Number 6. The Platform. I know this movie technically came out in 2019, but since it released on Netflix in 2020, and thus became available for other countries than Spain, I'm counting it. My dad, brother, and I were browsing Netflix and came across The Platform, which had such an interesting concept that we checked it out. You'd think I would love this movie, sharing the same name as my favorite video game genre, but I found it a bit too disturbing for my liking. People are locked in rooms in a prison where everything is colored gray, and a buffet is sent down to each room. I guess that doesn't sound too bad, but the problem is that if you're in one of the lower rooms, you won't get much food, and the food that remains has been gnawed on by others. Who knows what diseases they might bear, even worse if someone pissed or shat on it. It doesn't help that there's a cannibal in there, and a crazy chick that'll murder you if you mess with her, and since each cellmate is allowed to bring any object they want, there's bound to be some weapons too. For these reasons, that prison is the last place I want to be in. Seriously, I'd rather live in the cruel worlds of Attack on Titan or Game of Thrones, and that's saying something. The final act was all kinds of disturbing too, with people dying painful deaths, the main character suffering from all kinds of pains, and the ending leaving him in the dark at the very bottom of the prison. That little girl he saved, by the way, probably got slung into the roof of the prison, so I doubt there's any hope for her either. I wouldn't call this movie bad per se, but I didn't find it very good either, and most of all, I was beyond grossed out by it. Still more exciting than Death to 2020 though, I'll admit, so that's why it's not at the bottom. Number 5. The LEGO Star Wars Holiday Special. This was one of the movies I considered watching, but I didn't see it until this year, as it wasn't exactly priority. I haven't seen the original Star Wars Holiday Special, although I have seen glimpses of it, and I've heard that it's an absolute dumpster fire. I suppose it was necessary then to make a better one, and what better way to accomplish that than by presenting it in LEGO form. This one focuses on Rey, who I don't really care for, but this LEGO movie is harmless enough for it to matter, and I thought her voice actress did a pretty convincing job of sounding like Rey from episodes 7 to 9. She does sound exaggerated compared to in the sequel trilogy, but it fits the LEGO vibe. While I didn't find this special anything special, it was fairly decent, and did give me some laughs here and there. It does a good job at providing fan service, while also delivering some funny jokes, my favorite by far being when 3 iterations of LEGO Obi-Wan greeted each other with "Hello there" at the same time. That was just amazing to witness. I also liked seeing Palpatine roast Vader, and Vader trying to conceal his identity to Episode 4 Luke. Overall thoughts, I didn't love this special, but I liked it for what it was, substantially more so than The Platform, but not quite as much as the top 4. Number 4. Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic was the only movie I saw in theaters during 2020, and it was a happy coincidence that I actually saw it. A classmate and I had agreed to go to the theater sometime, and I waited to ask until the Sonic movie was relevant. Lo and behold, my classmate said that he, along with some buddies of his, were going to see the Sonic movie, and I was more than happy to join. This was also right before the whole corona situation that led to theaters closing, so it was real good timing. Wait a minute, I'm not a Sonic fan, so why did I want to see its movie? That's because I had heard good things about it, which is unusual for movies based on video games, and I couldn't think of another movie I wanted to watch in theaters anyway. While I wouldn't call the movie great, I found it pretty good, which is more than is expected of a game movie. Sonic was a bit annoying at times, but I suppose that's part of his character, and he had a sweet arc over the course of the story. I liked his relationship with Donut Lord, who was a very charming guy that sometimes rightfully put Sonic in his place. Of course, Dr. Robotnik was very entertaining as well. He was portrayed by the hilarious actor Jim Carrey after all. Perhaps my favorite moments in the movie were whenever we saw surroundings slowed down from Sonic's perspective, and he did all kinds of tomfoolery at the speed of sound. My least favorite moment was probably when Sonic got reawakened by the power of friendship. I know it falls in line with the messaging of the film, but that scene felt a little forced. The visuals after that were really cool though. Speaking of visuals, reworking Sonic's model to look more faithful was a really smart decision. The movie wouldn't have been as watchable otherwise. I might have been more into the movie had I understood more of the references, like the others I saw it with, but it was fun, and I could at least appreciate the Sonic Easter egg. It was an especially fun theater experience, which would sadly be the year's last. Number 3. Pokémon Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. I'm a fan of the first Pokémon movie, and while this 3D remake is inferior, I still really enjoyed it, due to how much I enjoyed the original. It is the same content after all, at least for the most part, and while the 3D is a bit jarring, I also find it cool all the same. It looks like a Pokémon game, only with actual good graphics this time, although it did take away from some of the scenes. The original Mewtwo Strikes Back just looks better with its timeless 2D art, which presented a more effective tone. Something I really didn't like was that the "Brother, My Brother" song didn't play while the Pokémon and clones of them were fighting against each other. That was a really hard-hitting scene in the original, and it just didn't have nearly the same weight here. As the title implies, this movie focuses on the legendary Pokémon Mewtwo, him being the antagonist to Ash and the others, but also kind of the protagonist, given how he gets the most development. I actually really like his character, he's probably my favorite in all of Pokémon. Given that he's a clone, he repeatedly questions his existence and wants to exact vengeance against humans for seemingly manipulating Pokémon. He goes through an interesting arc of learning that humans aren't so bad after all, since not only do they respect their Pokémon companions, but their Pokémon respect them back. He's also such a badass, having a cool design that's even cooler in the armor Giovanni gives him, and his powers are so flashy. His presence really commands every scene he's in, and it's fun watching him just throw humans and Pokémon around. I also find it cool that since he's a clone, he creates his own clone army that are supposedly improved versions of their Pokémon counterparts. His absolute badassery is contrasted well by the adorableness of his originator Mew, who despite just seeming cute and harmless can actually put up a fight. I'll admit that the scene near the end where the Pokémon cry Ash back to life is really far-fetched, but it does work well at making me emotional. I really like Mewtwo Strikes Back. It's probably my favorite video game movie, but its remake isn't as effective as its original counterpart, so I didn't feel good about placing it higher. It's not like a remake was necessary anyway. Number 2. Phineas and Ferb the movie, Candace Against the Universe. This movie wasn't necessary either, but I'm glad it was made, because I love Phineas and Ferb, and while I didn't exactly love this movie, I found some enjoyment in it. It's impossible not to compare it to the other, much better Phineas and Ferb movie, which by the way is my favorite movie from the last decade, but I went into this movie not expecting it to be able to reach that height, which was for the best. It was really good and had that Phineas and Ferb charm I love so much, with plenty of funny jokes and memorable songs. I loved the scene where Perry was trying to save the spaceship from being bombarded with asteroids, while also trying not to be seen by anyone, and the accompanying song made that scene even better. Doofenshmirtz's adulting song against Isabella was also really funny, but my favorite scene of his was when him using his chicken replacinator only teleported them a few meters, instead of sending them back to Earth, because he had already turned something else into a chicken. That being followed by his Axinator having a self-destruct button on the back was the cherry on top. Another hilarious scene was when Exceeding Lightspeed transformed the regular animation to black and white, then storyboard, and finally to the Phineas and Ferb creators in real life. That was an ingenious fourth wall break. Probably the funniest moment of the whole movie was when they used a battle song to bamboozle the aliens and scale their walls. That's one of the funniest diversions I've seen. The ending song was a great way to wrap up the film, kind of like Summer Belongs to You or the series' final performance. Granted not as impactful, but still really good. As the title implies, this movie is about Candace, which is a good choice of focus, since she's her brother's greatest antagonist, and honestly more compelling than them. I'll have to admit though, she was behaving incredibly selfishly. She has been really selfish before, but she seemed extra mean-spirited this time, so it felt out of character. I also cringed from the flossing, but I guess it's not that big a deal. Candace Against the Universe, while being nowhere near as good as Across the Second Dimension, was still really enjoyable, just not enough to make number 1. Number 1. My Hero Academia: Heroes Rising. Coming out on top is yet another TV show movie, and this time the show in question is My Hero Academia. Heroes Rising was plenty enjoyable, and has the best production value MHA has gotten thus far. The art looks clean in almost every frame, and the animation quality is unreal. The story was also done well, managing to balance a whole bunch of characters despite the limited time frame. Some shine brighter than others, like Deku and Bakugo of course, but all of them still contribute to the bigger picture, which I felt was missing in the first movie. I particularly liked the side fight between the Chimera villain and Todoroki, Ida, Kirishima, and Froppy. Their teamwork was awesome to watch. Even though they were barely involved, it was also cool to see Endeavor and Hawks, simply because I love their characters. This movie surprisingly takes place after where the anime is currently at, which made it interesting for us manga readers who knew why certain things were the way they were. It was awesome to see Shigaraki wearing the red coat, although it was odd that his hair was still blue, when it should have turned white by now. I hope the anime fixes that. It was funny seeing Tokoyami casually flying while on the phone, and that Nine couldn't steal One for All because it contains too many quirks for him to handle. Even though this movie is my number 1, it's not by much, as I do have some problems with it, regarding One for All in particular. Don't get me wrong, the scene where Deku gives Bakugo his power is incredibly impactful and heartfelt, especially since, at this point in the story, Bakugo is a lot more receptive towards Deku, and shows concern from his decision. The fight was also extraordinarily animated, on a whole other level than MHA has seen prior, and the use of the beautiful Might Plus You song really sold the emotion of the scene. However, Deku giving Bakugo One for All in and of itself is kind of problematic, at least outside of the show, because then it doesn't really matter. I know this movie is supposedly canon, but it removes the consequence from this decision by the quirk somehow going back to Deku. Worse yet, Bakugo doesn't even remember having it, which basically tells you that this movie can be forgotten. That's the thing about these MJ movies, they're really enjoyable to watch for sure, but they just don't offer that same investment as the show, which is given a lot more breathing room. This is apparent with the movie's villain, Nine, who, while being a badass, isn't given much character, so I'm not as invested in the fight scenes as I would have been had it been against an already established villain. Speaking of which, Shigaraki showing up to Decay 9 made me more hyped than anything 9 did. Another problem with the movies is how they affect the anime. Many watchers of the anime, including myself, noticed a dip in production quality for Season 4, and it surely has to be due to the effort put into this movie. I would therefore prefer there to be no MJ movies at all, at least until the show is actually finished. Wow, that was a long rant, but despite that, I still really like this movie. I sadly don't love it though, and I'm not sure whether I prefer it over the first one, because while this one definitely had the best animation and moments, it also had more bullshit to it. So, that was my ranking of the 7 2020 movies I saw. While that's more than I usually watch, and some of them were really good, there weren't any that I truly loved, so I suppose it was quantity over quality compared to some prior years. To be fair, most of the big movies did get delayed, so maybe I'll see some heavy hitters that'll release this year, like Dune. I'll also watch the third My Hero Academia movie, of course. There'll probably be more opportunities to visit theaters soon, as more and more people are vaccinated. Hopefully that doesn't take too long. I'm Arcadon, and hopefully you'll see me next time!